Britain had decided the only way to solve this was to give a portion of this land to the Arabs in order to shut them up and stop them from fighting. And in accordance with that, the British closed the gates of Palestine at the time when the Jews were starting to be exterminated in Europe.
Ladies and gentlemen, Melanie Phillips is going to tell us all about what's going on right now. I'm your favorite Zionist prince, Tal the Traveling Clat. Let's take a look at this clip.
The fundamental narrative about Israel essentially is that as a compensation for the Holocaust, the Jews were given a piece of someone else's land in the Middle East where they've settled, and now there is a battle over that piece of land because of that original sin, if you like. Which,
by the way, if you love what I do here, please subscribe to the channel right now because we're trying to hit 500,000 subscribers. Please help us out by subscribing right now if you believe in what I do.
Is a viewpoint that, frankly, up until I started listening to some of your talks, it was unshakable in my understanding. Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't know, I honestly don't know enough about it.
That's the default narrative.
Yeah. So, in what way is that not the case, Melanie?
Every single thing that you just said is untrue.
Mm-hmm. Most of your conversations,
that'll make him happy.
Obviously, it's a big subject, but the idea that the Jews had no connection to the land of Israel until a guilt-ridden West took them out as a remnant of the Holocaust and stuck them into someone else's country is the opposite of the truth.
So what is the truth?
The Jews are the only people for whom the land of Israel was ever their national kingdom, hundreds and hundreds of years before Islam was even invented and before the Arabs invaded. The Jews were the original nation upon which America and Britain, in a kind of mystical fashion in Britain, modeled themselves. Why do I say that? They were a nation because they were a people in a particular area of land which they governed according to laws they made and which they defended. Now, they were a nation for several hundred years under various kings, and then they were basically kicked out, and then they returned, then they kicked out again. And then that land of Israel was occupied by vast numbers of different civilizations. The Romans, the Assyrians, the Arabs, various sorts of Muslims, Christians, Crusaders, and for a long period the Ottoman Turks, who were Muslim but not Arab. And then we get to the turn of the last century, and there grew up in Britain, mainly as a result of evangelical Christianity, a movement to return the Jews to their ancestral homeland. And these people were called Christian Zionists. And the kind of apogee of Christian Zionism in political terms was the Balfour Declaration in 1917. It was a cabinet which was dominated by Christian Zionists, and they believed that it was their duty to help the Jews return, to restore their ancient homeland. Long story short, as you will know, after the First World War, the entire Middle East was carved up between Britain and France, which, in itself was a questionable activity, and they created
various... Makes for nice straight lines on the map, doesn't it?
well, yes, slightly more complicated than straight lines, but anyway. So, some of these countries that they created, you could say that's very questionable. But basically, the precursor of the United Nations, which was then the League of Nations, in the 1920s, decided that as a matter of international treaty obligation, Britain would be given custodianship of what was then called Palestine, a name given to it insultingly by the Romans in order to erase its Jewish identity. The British would be given custodianship of Palestine, called the Mandate, under which Britain would be under a binding treaty obligation to return the Jews to their ancestral homeland, to recreate it. Now, what was Palestine at the time? Well, a bit of it, a very large chunk of it, was promptly given away to the Arabs by Winston Churchill to become Transjordan, which is now Jordan. So what did that leave as the territory within which Britain had a binding duty undertaken by the world body of the time to return the Jews as a matter of historic right. What was that territory? It is what is now Israel, what is called the West Bank, and Gaza. That is a territory to which the Jews alone were given the right to return because they alone had ruled it. Terms which have never been abrogated, even though the League of Nations is no more. It gave rise to the United Nations. But the United Nations took on, in its charter, it took on all the obligations of its predecessor unless they were specifically abrogated. Those terms have never been abrogated. So what then happened was, although the Arabs at the time, around 1917, 1918, King Faisal notably, and one or two others, they said, we welcome back the Jews to their ancestral homeland. They used this term because it was in their own religion. They knew this was a Jewish homeland. And then a lot of stuff happened. Basically, the British, having undertaken in the first place this duty to settle the Jews in their ancestral homeland, the British colonial office at the time and the colonial administrators who were put into Palestine to administer this mandate did everything they could to stop it. And they, among other things, brought in an Islamic firebrand. This was at the time when Islamism, as we know it, political Islam, was growing. It was sort of invented after the First World War. And the British brought in a particular Islamic firebrand called Haj Amin al-Husseini as the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. And he was brought in to incite revolt, and he did. There were then pogroms after pogroms after pogroms of the returning Jews.
Truth doesn't matter. Truth in the world we live in today does not matter anymore. There's no such thing as an objective truth. Like, there's no such thing as to say, there's a genocide happening in Gaza, but the population has increased by between 60 to 90,000 in the last year. But there's a genocide going on. Because nowadays, a genocide doesn't constitute the actual eradication or the attempt of eradication of a people. It's a feeling. A genocide is a feeling. It doesn't matter that the Palestinian population has increased 10x since 1948, but Israel is continuously trying to wipe them out and ethnically cleanse them. Yet Palestinians today are richer than they ever were, more successful than they ever were, under the state of Israel. Truth doesn't matter. It's about a feeling. It's about how you feel. If you feel like you're being genocided, you're being genocided. I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you long time. If you believe in my content and want to support me, just know your help is needed. There's a bunch of great ways to support me, being PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, or joining my Patreon community down below. Patreon is the best way to support my channel, and you'll get a bunch of cool perks depending on what tier you join. Another great way to support me is by buying my merchandise on thetravelingclat.com. I regularly drop new merch designs like this beautiful hat or this amazing shirt, where you can support the channel and get something cool for yourself. I also have an amazing Discord community with people from all over the world. Thank you so much for your support.